the most deadly substance to Americans is something we eat every day. Sodium, or more simply salt, is one of those overconsumed nutrients in an American diet.
Goals to cut sodium levels in packaged and processed foods by about 20%.
Eating on average 1,000 milligrams over the daily recommended amount. How does this happen, and what foods are high in sodium? Well, I'm glad you asked. Basically, everything has sodium in it. It's either inherent to the food itself, added for taste, or added as a preservative. The main danger with overconsuming sodium is that it increases your blood pressure and increases your risk for heart disease, with heart disease being one of the most common things to kill Americans every year.
Now, some researchers have suggested that limiting salt intake in the United States might save as many lives as the reductions in tobacco use, but others disagree.
They may be thinking, if sodium is such a big deal, why is no one doing anything about it? Well, they are, sort of. 4 out of 10 Americans say they're trying to cut back on sodium, and 39% of people that enjoy salty snacks will eat healthier if they were available. There's a few problems that I see here. One is that most people probably don't know how to actually cut back on sodium, mainly because this requires some change in diet, lifestyle, habits, and not just using the salt shaker less or just snacking less often, making eating less sodium a little bit harder than you might initially think. 2 is that people are just kind of lying. Healthier snacks are available. Fruit. The amount of sodium in an apple is 2 milligrams for a whole apple. And actually most fruits have 1 to 8 milligrams per 100 grams of fruit. What the people are really saying is they want food that tastes salty without actually having a lot of sodium. The third problem is that 90% of Americans overeat sodium, making about 50% that just don't care. But that's fine. That's why you're here. And maybe, just maybe, we can get more people to lie to themselves about wanting to eat less sodium. Let's start with snacks, because Americans love to snack, which really isn't that surprising, I guess. Nonetheless, snacking accounts for about 20% of daily energy consumption, with people going to grab a quick snack about 3 times a day. And that's a good amount of food. And if we go off 2,000 calories daily, and you and I both know Americans eat way more than 2,000 calories, it'd be 400 calories for snacking, which for just a quick snack can seem like a lot, but you can really get to that number pretty quickly. Now let's take a look at a bag of Lay's potato chips. They are 160 calories per one of these small bags. And you know, not to mention that most of these things are just air anyway, eating 3 of these wouldn't really be that difficult. And we can see the sodium for one bag is 140 milligrams, or about 6% of the daily recommended amount. Now if you were to say only eat these chips for an entire day for your calories, you actually wouldn't pass the daily recommended amount of 2,300 milligrams of sodium. It would only get you to 1,750. This makes them not bad, but I wouldn't say they're ideal either. However, this could be an anomaly. Looking at other top snacks like Cheetos, Doritos, pretzels, and crackers, and doing the same calculations, you would find the sodium levels actually exceed the daily recommended amount. Now, there's 2 ways to kind of calculate if something is high in sodium or not. The simplest way is looking at the calories and the milligrams per serving and seeing how close they are. If something has more milligrams of sodium than calories, it's probably bad and high in sodium. If it has about equal or a little less, it's okay, could be improved. But when it's significantly less, I could consider that to be low on sodium and a decent option to eat. Second way is a little more complicated. Basically, you take whatever your daily calories are. The general guideline goes off 2,000 calories. So if you take 1% of 2,000, that'd be about 20 calories. So you just take your bag of chips and divide the calories you see there by 20. So 160 divided by 20 gives you 8. And if you look at the percentage of sodium, you can see it's 6%, meaning this bag of chips is going to be about 8% of your calories, and the sodium is about 6% of your daily amount. This might be a better way of calculating how much sodium you're eating, but it requires more knowledge of your daily intake and doing a bit of math to figure it out. One thing to note is that this method doesn't work for everything you see on a nutrition label. Really, if there's just a maximum, meaning that if your daily intake of calories is a little lower, it means you can technically eat more sodium proportionally. Looking through this kind of surprised me, because I was expecting to see a lot more sodium in these salty snacks. And while it's not great, it's definitely much better than what my initial assumption would be. Still, this is just one way people can reduce the amount of sodium they eat every day, either replacing some of their snacks with fruit or some certain brands of popcorn. And honestly, if salty snacks were the main causer of high sodium intake, this probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. Getting to the root of the issue requires a deeper analysis of what we eat every day. We need to look at what Americans tend to eat for a typical meal and how much sodium is in these meals. And about 50% of Americans' diet is ultra-processed food, or UPFs for short. We all have a good idea of what a UPF is, just kind of intuitively. You know, the nuggets you get from fast food, the Cheetos that you eat for a snack, and soda. It kind of has those unnatural shapes, the weird coloring, the artificial flavors. and the like. This part makes sense. You kind of know when you're eating it, it's unhealthy, it's super processed, but you're doing it just because you enjoy the flavor, you're kind of treating yourself to a little snack, or just quick and convenient, you just need something. What also gets added to this list is packaged bread. And while we can probably reasonably assume that bread is probably more processed than a potato you could pull straight from the ground, it may seem a little weird that is this the same as a chicken nugget from Wendy's or soda or any kind of weird snack food that has unnatural colors? Trying to understand this requires to look at what's called the Nova scale. The Nova scale is designed by a team in Brazil to kind of categorize food and how much processing goes into making it. And they have 4 categories. 1 being unprocessed or minimally processed food. This is just stuff taken from plants or animals and basically unchanged. Hopefully they might go through it with some sanitizing and cleaning, but this process will only subtract and never really add. Here we have eggs, grains, fruits and veggies, meat, chilled or frozen, and the spices. The next category is oils, fats, salts, and sugars. And you can see these as your culinary processed ingredients, usually made by pressing, grinding, crushing, pulverizing, something like that to kind of get the desired result. These foods are usually something you cook with and you add in moderation to keep a nutritional balance, being obviously oil, butter, refined salt, honey, maple syrup, and everything like that. It could also be a combination of the two, so like salted butter is also in this category. Next we got processed food. Not ultra processed yet, just processed. And this is when you just add group 2 foods to group 1, usually to preserve or make something a little bit more palatable. So there's like your bacon, your beef jerky, canned foods, fresh made bread, and fresh made cheese. And the last category is ultra processed foods. Food this way is more of a formulation or a synthesized process. This is where all the additives, molding, coloring, and flavoring takes place. Some of these foods can either have very little or almost none group 1 foods. This is where you get your snacks, your sodas, your prepackaged food, your packaged bread, your breakfast cereals, your breakfast bars, and the list can go honestly on and on from here. A good heuristic for all this is just look at the ingredients, and the more there are, the more likely there are to be processed food or ultra processed food. The less there are, they're more likely to be minimally processed or that culinary group of processed food. So when you go to the supermarket and pick up a fresh pack of chicken breast, you try and look where the ingredients are, it'll just say chicken or just chicken breast. If you go to pick up some butter, you'll see it just say sweet cream, and then maybe salt if you get the salted version. When you go to bacon, it has a bit more being a group 3 food, but still pretty reasonable in terms of the ingredients. Pork, water, organic brown sugar, salt, vinegar, made with organic ingredients, and celery powder. Just looking at that list, it's something pretty reasonable. It's basically a combination of group 1 and 2 foods with no real crazy additives or hard to pronounce things or something you've never heard of. And let's take a look at this simple, healthy looking frozen meal. Here we have a healthy looking grilled chicken and broccoli Alfredo frozen meal. There's 190 calories per serving and 600 milligrams of sodium. When taking a look at the ingredients, they start normal, they start to get strange, with the chicken having chicken breast, water, sugar, sea salt, olive oil, isolated soy protein, isolated soy product. Then the Alfredo sauce is just as strange, with that having whey protein concentrate, potassium chloride, and locust bean gum. And now, while some of these ingredients may be hard to pronounce or you don't know how to say them at all, that doesn't mean they're dangerous. It's just an indication that they've been more processed than other foods. The main problem I have with frozen food like this is that it tricks people into thinking that it's probably only slightly less healthy than cooking, because it looks good, it's like a simple protein and vegetables, doesn't seem like there's anything crazy going on, looks like food you can make at home, but just frozen for you. So it's able to last a long time in the fridge or freezer. So when you just look at the nutrition label, all you really do is look for 3 different things and kind of see how it compares to a serving size. 1 is the saturated fat, 2 is the added sugars, and 3 is the obvious sodium we've been talking about. And usually at least one of these things will be absurdly high, mainly because the way things taste good to us is from spices, fats, or sugars. Like that's why we love putting butter on a lot of our stuff. That's why the yolk of the egg is usually the tasty part. That's why those sugary sweets are so tasty, and why we like salty snacks. So if all these are low, the freezer food would probably either not have enough preservative to have it last for a long shelf life, or be so bland that no one would want to even buy in the first place. It's a little annoying that these things are being marketed as a healthy option with no real standard as to what makes something a healthy product in the first place, other than maybe being low in calories. And to be fair, some of these prepared meals are probably better than some fast food, drinking lots of soda, snacks, candy. They are probably a little bit healthier in that regard, but I don't want to call them healthy. So if your first step to eating better is maybe to stop eating fast food as much or going out to eat as much, and you start going for these frozen meals pre-prepared and eat those, you know what, that's probably better, and I support that. But it should be a stepping stone to getting to a point where you cook your own meals. And the natural move for a lot of people might be to look to something like HelloFresh that kind of gives you an easy guide an easy entryway into cooking your own food. Unfortunately, a lot of these places aren't that much better. As convenient as they are, a lot of the meals on these websites have a lot of sodium. I tried looking at HelloFresh and Factor specifically, and everything I find is super high in sodium, especially when you account for the amount of calories you're getting in each serving. Trying to scour through, there are only 2 options I could find that were less than 650 milligrams of sodium in the meal, which isn't too bad, but when everything else is super high in sodium, some exceeding 1500 or 1600 milligrams per serving, it becomes hard to recommend these as a legitimate alternative. And this feels a little contradictory because they're supposed to be fresh ingredients delivered right to you, almost kind of from the grocery store itself. So what gives? What happened? I tried to do a deep dive on one and try to really figure out where the sodium was coming from and really dig through the ingredients. And the one I picked was their pineapple salsa pork tacos, mainly because they look good. And when looking at the menu on their website, they showed up as a bigger picture on the website, kind of making it look like they wanted me to pick that specifically, or they're really trying to push that for people to eat. And looking at the sodium content, it's 1640 milligrams per serving, which is a really insane amount. Like which is more than what some organizations might say the actual goal for sodium intake should be. When you look at the ingredients list, it kind of throws you for a loop because you don't see anything that can be high in sodium. You see pineapple, ground pork, lime, pepper, tortillas, onion, and there's a Tex-Mex paste and a Southwest spice blend. And those two is really where it gets a little confusing because you don't really know what's in these and you don't know how to check. There's no way from here to kind of click in and try and check what is in the Tex-Mex paste, what is in the ground pork, what is in this, what is in that. It just kind of shows up there and this is the ingredients and that's it. If you do a little more Googling, a little more looking around, you can find the Tex-Mex paste specifically on the HelloFresh website, and it's still a little annoying to show you what's in it, which is fine. It's part of their own recipe they don't want to share, but at least they do tell you the nutritional info on the paste. And it did confirm my suspicion that almost all the sodium was actually coming from this one thing, which feels a little annoying because if you're trying to be healthy, maybe you watch your calories, watch your sodium because you have high blood pressure, and you're making this fresh food thinking it's good and fresh, and you're having so much trouble finding a recipe on this website or at any of these websites that don't have a lot of sodium. But if you learn like, oh, if I just don't use the Tex-Mex paste, it's actually like really good on sodium, and maybe I could use a different thing altogether to kind of give it a flavor that I like without having it being high in sodium. Because if you just remove the paste from this recipe and replace it with something else, I actually really recommend these tacos because they probably are good. It seems pretty easy to make, like all HelloFresh recipes are, but there's no way to know how to adjust something to be like, oh, if you need a little less sodium, if you need a little less this, a little more that, they would recommend doing X, Y, and Z. But they don't. They just kind of tell you, this is how you make it. This is the nutritional value per serving. And I think a little more transparency on these websites, especially this recipe specifically, could help a lot of people make better decisions about their food and their health. So what are the real ways you can eat healthier foods and avoid having too much sodium in them? The obvious answer is to stop eating ultra processed food and cook all your own food. I just don't think this kind of sudden change is doable for most people, especially if they're eating half their food a day as ultra processed food. Small steps over a long time are the real way of achieving long-term, long-lasting goals. Another thing is that studies have shown that most of the sodium in our diet has come from UPFs or going to eat out. The amount we add ourselves is pretty low, either while cooking or adding a little bit extra ourselves only adds up to about 11%, with the remaining sodium coming from food itself. Maybe you start looking at snacks that are lower in sodium and branded as being low in salt or having no added salt. Maybe when you go out to eat, you ask for the restaurants to cook your food with no salt or add very little salt, and then maybe change your side. So maybe it's something like vegetables or fruit or something with less sodium in it. Start meal prepping here and there so you give yourself a meal you know is good for you. Seasoning your food at home, maybe use herbs and spices instead of just salt. Doing all these at once might be hard. So just pick one you feel confident you can do and build up from there. Eventually you'll be able to get to a point where you're making most of your own food and controlling how much salt can be in it. And that's really the main point of all this. It's not to make you doomer about all the food choices you make. It's really about making you aware and point you in the right direction, helping you realize what is and isn't high in sodium, showing you what parts of the meal contribute to being high in sodium, allowing you to make smarter decisions here and there, and hopefully leading you to a life that lets you live a little bit longer and healthier. And I'll say this again, doing all this is hard. Most of you watching probably won't make any changes at all, but maybe some of you will. And to me, that's good enough. And also, you can still enjoy these salty foods and snacks. I love getting Wendy's. I love eating chips. I just really try and make sure I eat them sparingly and only on occasion, and try to remove them from my daily or even weekly diet. If you made it to this point in the video, I just want to say thank you and consider liking and subscribing. That's all I got for you guys today. See you in the next one.